Isn't it odd that in some of the Sam episodes from the show are either hit and miss, and whenever they're a hit, they're considered one of the best highlights involving Sam's character? For me personally, I consider those episodes a major improvement when it comes to how executed Sam's character is, while the missed episodes are either just Sam being Sam and just mostly messing with Freddy constantly, and most of the time it just isn't funny, and whenever it does end up being funny, it's usually done at some of the other episodes that doesn't involve Sam's character. In my opinion, I Reunite with Missy is one of those Sam episodes that can give more likability to Sam, not to mention relatability. Granted, this episode isn't one of my favorites compared to the last two episodes I reviewed, but on the other hand, it's still harmless, especially for an episode that came out at the end of the second season of this show. In this episode, Missy returns to his Carla's longtime friend after so many years, and Sam is a little bit suspicious. Granted, in the first scenes, she's mostly okay with Missy being around, but later on, she accidentally texts Sam the wrong address to where the piano factory is, and when she tried to catch Sam's phone, she ends up dropping it into a cup of Wahoo Punch. And to make it up for her, she gave her chocolate, which is from Prancin chocolate. But unfortunately, it was actually expired from 1992. For me personally, the fact that they did make Sam mostly abusive towards Missy because she gives him way too many chances, and then the final chance, which involves Prancin chocolate that were expired, you can tell that she is trying everything to not being really aggressive towards Missy, unlike he does with Freddy. For me personally, it really gives Sam more of a character than the fact that she actually gives other people some chances. Normally, when she's paired with someone else, she would instantly go against them after one chance. But the fact that she's giving Missy multiple chances because she is one of Carly's longtime friends, you can easily think that Missy wasn't meant to go after Sam, until we see her true colors in the second half of this episode. This is the only episode where Missy makes an appearance, and when she hides her true colors behind Carly's back, just so that she can be close friends with her, unlike Sam, you can really tell that the people who made this show are trying to make you sympathize with Sam more than Missy. Even though she's one of the characters that you can tell that the writers are trying to make you despise her, but on the other hand, it's really not much of a big loss when it comes to what we witness from the newer characters that we've seen later in the show. Because let me tell you that even if the new characters don't drag down this show much when it comes to the plot holes and stuff, they do not compare to characters like Missy, who are an actual threat, not to mention an interesting character motivation instead of just doing something without motivation whatsoever. And what makes this episode even more better is when Sam turns to Freddy after learning that Missy was going after her the entire time. And Freddy says that Sam is jealous of Missy, which is what Carly said in the second half of this episode, since that she is suspicious that Sam just isn't getting along with Missy that much. Not only that, this episode came out after I Kiss, and considering that this is mostly a slightly growing relationship between Freddy and Sam, Sam even went up to Freddy because it was literally the only option that she had, saying that, "Did I ever come here before for help or anything?" Which made Freddy think otherwise, because he wouldn't believe Sam after all the harsh things that she did to him in the past. Freddy in this episode enters a contest where he can go on a cruise, which is called the School at Sea. And trust me, for anyone who's desperate to go on sea in the contest, which is something that other schools would always do in order to give everyone else's interest for doing something really good by doing a contest, Freddy participates. And since that he actually won the school at sea, he decides to give it to Missy. And considering it was obvious that Missy never participated at the school at sea, she honestly just decides to take it. Pretty much sums up her character in a nutshell, that she doesn't care about Carly or Sam whatsoever, and she only cares about what she gets when she is rewarded for nothing. And let me tell you, the fact that Freddie decided to deny on going on the school at sea since that he won, he actually did a great move. Because we all know, because we've learned in this episode that Missy is seasick. And as you can see, the boat that we've seen at the end of this episode, it's really not that special. Granted, I can guarantee you that the budget on just trying to find the wheelboat, while also the screen effects involving Missy puking in the ocean will probably be a little bit more expensive. But on the other hand, I guess that Freddie will probably have a miserable time being on the boat while completely dealing with the fact that the boat that he won, well, not really won, but being able to go on during the next week or so won't be anything special. And as my headcanon on what happened to Missy after this episode, he decided to go overboard and completely leaving the boat and just trying to find her own place after ditching Carly and Sam. You know, in all honesty, for how much Missy is so terrible in this episode, for how selfish she is, this is basically a long time coming, especially nearly making Sam completely sick after eating expired chocolates. Anyway, I've been going on long enough regarding the subplot involving Spencer and Chuck. And honestly, if you saw my top 10 Dwayne iCarly episode list that I made back in 2017, I wasn't really much of a fan of the subplot. Then again, that was 3.5 years ago, and I really didn't like what I enjoyed involving iCarly back then. Looking at it now, this subplot involving Chuck trapping Spencer in after he was planning to go on a camping trip with his friends, only to being fallen over with the stuff that was in the cage, which leads to Chuck completely locking Spencer in the cage. It's honestly a punishment that goes way too far even for Chuck. Here's my biggest issue on why I do not like Chuck whatsoever. He's basically like Neville again, except that he is really irresponsible, which is something that children are usually do since that Chuck is longer than Neville. But on the other hand, the fact that Spencer asks him nicely to not play any tennis racketing in the hallways and he just ignores him, and then when he does it again, he just completely flips out. For me personally, this mini rivalry between Spencer and Chuck may be entertaining. I will admit that there were other episodes later on that actually made me enjoy the subplot, but even with that, it's just not enough for me to actually find some kind of enjoyment from this. I wouldn't say that the actor playing Chuck is a terrible actress for how he's portrayed in this, because he ended up going to Parallel Canes on Disney XD, and his role in that show made me appreciate his acting a little better. But in this, even though that the more I watch these, the more I recognize multiple people, I still can't be able to appreciate the characters that they do in those shows. No offense, but this idea of having Spencer being locked into the cage all because he got Chuck grounded over something that he shouldn't be doing is honestly a little too far to lock him in the cage. Granted, not every child is supposed to be a great child, but for how this rivalry has been going on through the majority of the series, well, mainly from seasons 2 and 3, and then it culminates in the 6th season where we don't get to see Chuck but his brother Chip, it really makes this entire rivalry honestly meaningless. And I can guarantee you that I highly doubt that Chuck would return in the reboot, because for how old he's getting, he's gonna be doing other roles. But other than the subplot, this episode is good as it is. It can give you more appreciation involving Sam, considering that she isn't really abusive whatsoever in this episode. Well, minus the beginning where he pushes Freddie into his apartment after whipping his clothes off. That's literally the only thing that Sam does, but it really shows that there's at least one moment in some episodes where Sam has to be abusive towards Freddie in some other way. Granted, you can correct me that in every episode that she does that, but she mostly insults him and nothing else. But other than that, this episode made me appreciate of how likable Sam is if he can put aside her abusive behavior towards others. If there's gonna be people debating on which Sam episode is better, you can comment down below. If you want to know why I didn't review those episodes, that it's mainly the fact that I wanted to put my focus on this episode since most people don't usually talk about it. And I did mention this episode back in 2016, where I reviewed the episodes from My Little Pony from the first ever My Little Pony month. If you guys ever are curious on that, I just wanted to bring that up because I did bring this episode up before, which was 4.5 years ago, possibly. So, talking about this episode now is probably the best time, and it really gives me an understanding of how this show is a lot more different compared to what I've seen back in 2016. I give this episode a 7.25 out of 10.
Let's get this started again. Me and my whole crew.